Hello everybody, here we are today talking about Vancouver Canucks head coach Rick Tocchet and why he's one of the more interesting coaches to keep an eye out for through the rest of the season. But before we get started with that, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So yes, talking about Tocchet in this one, and this is where you see him in his third season with the team, where last year in his second season things went really well. They ended up winning the division last year. They won 50 games last year. They had the biggest point differential swing in the NHL last year, in a positive way. And again, when you hear last year so many times in a row, you're like, well, that is very recent. But I think the thing is now, with this third season maybe not going as well, you're starting to hear more rumblings about, upset Vancouver fans. Even though last season, again, last year, kind of going back to that, they made it to the second round and could have possibly been a little bit healthier and gone on to the Western Conference Final. Probably not beating Dallas, but still a talking point. And again, maybe in a different environment where things aren't as, hot-headed or just passionate, you'd imagine that a coach that is currently occupying a playoff spot after making the playoffs last year would be safe from some of that scrutiny. But the problem is the Canucks aren't in a safe or secure playoff spot. We've already talked about how the top three of the division seems unattainable, and with the Minnesota Wild being a pretty good team that get off to a really good start, they lock up that top wildcard spot, leaving one spot. And teams like Calgary and Vancouver have kind of been going toe-to-toe, side-by-side for the course of the year. And even when the Flames lose a little bit of momentum, you have a team like the St. Louis Blues that have been lurking in the shadows that are now, I think, even with the Canucks for points, but they do have a game that they played more, or you could say that the Canucks have a game in hand. So you realize that the potential for Vancouver to return to the playoffs is there, but it's not set in stone, and I think that's where frustration is boiled over, because this team is set to regress quite a bit after, jumping up in the standings from 83 points to 108, 109, somewhere around there, and then kind of falling back to earth a little bit. And to be the last team out is one of the worst spots you can be in, because you don't get a number one overall pick, and you are going to be a side that is saying, man, if we got in there, maybe we don't actually do anything crazy, but there's always the big what if. But aside from daydreaming about where your team could be, we can look back at this team and see that the Canucks have not been very good for a while now. Going back to February 17th of 2024, if that is correct, this is where the wheels seem to fall off a little bit for the Canucks. They started off the year fantastic, looked like they could win the President's Trophy, and since that date they've played 95 games. They have won just 45 of those. They rank 22nd in the league in points percentage, and this is just a team that doesn't look like what we saw in the first 55 games of the year last season for Vancouver. We're saying it's all coming together and things are working really well. And I think one of the huge things we can talk about here for Vancouver too, probably more so for this season, but I think you could probably apply it to the fall off from last year as well, is the fact that they have not had a long winning streak. They have not won more than 3 in a row since, I think, October. So you have a team that, had they got knocked out in the first round, especially, all circumstances aside about Thatcher Demko and goalie health and whatnot, where you would say, from February of 2024 to now, we are nearly bottom of the third in the league for points percentage. We get knocked out in the first round, and we are a side that is just seemingly a sinking ship. Thankfully, they beat Nashville to kind of avoid that talk, especially for a guy like Tocchet in this environment. But, things are not looking very pretty when you've played almost 100 games and you're in the situation that you're in. Not everything can be tied back to him. I think that there's been some really awkward things that have gone on with Brock Besser, and they talk about, you'd be just shocked by the lack of return we could have got with, of course, Alvin talking about trading away Brock. Mind you, of course, the whole alternate captain thing kind of got messy there, which is a little bit different a scenario in that regard. But other things too, where this team didn't make any trade deadline acquisitions to try to get better. That is not solely in Rick's possession to be able to do that. And that's got to be hard, knowing that you're seeing teams like Dallas sign and trade for Mikko Rantanen. You're seeing, of course, Colorado make a lot of moves to shore up their team and try to make a run. It's just got to be painful knowing that this team has been kind of floundering for a little bit and there is no help on the return. But at the same time, too, there's other things you could probably point out that are more a little bit related to him. Looking at Elias Pettersson, going back to February 17th, he has played 89 games. He has 21 goals. This season, Pius Suter, Jake DeBrusk, Connor Garland, and then even Quinn Hughes, who recently has been kind of more of a goal scorer, but beforehand wasn't, are all likely to finish with more goals than Elias at this stage of the season. And you kind of wonder, again, with Elias Pettersson having that 15-game goalless drought, where he just picked up 5 assists, and I know people love the -3 in that time, where you wonder, going back to last year too with Elias, What's going wrong? Is Rick a big factor in that? And with him getting that contract, how can you get Elias back to being the guy that you're hoping that he could be? When we've seen before that he can be a very productive and very impactful player. I don't know if it's going to be in spurts now with Rick. I'm not exactly sure, but it is a major concern. And this is just one of those deals where when you have a guy that is one of your franchise guys that has been in a slump for this long, you start to worry and say, well, who is to blame? And then I think kind of circling back to all that, you have the Miller-Pettersson relationship where it created a whole rift with the team, and that is just a big blow in that regard, where you say, well, I have a divided locker room on a team that is trying to scrape their way into the playoffs, and that is tough. But there is kind of a counter argument here if you are Rick Tocchet about why all these things aren't necessarily your problem. For starters, if you aren't able to get a boost when other teams are getting a boost for the trade period, that is tough. And the organization, I think at times, has been kind of confusing because they have shown a willingness to sign not only good players, but players that they view as part of the future. They've signed extensions to Pettersson, they've signed extensions to Hughes, they've signed extensions to other guys like Kevin Lankinen recently, even though that contract is a little bit weird in terms of the 5-year part. But they've been able to say, yeah, we want to try to keep winning. And in this case, they probably needed Kevin more in the short term with Thatcher Demko being out. But there's been no move that says this is going to be a tilt in the balance of power, shifting it kind of our way. It seems like more and more, as we've seen in recent weeks, it's been shifting away from them. And they're in a spot right now where I didn't even think they'd be able to beat teams that aren't Stanley Cup contenders in the playoffs, which is a major concern. And you also have to kind of factor in Thatcher Demko, a Vezina finalist last year in net, and may not even get 30 games in this season. I don't think he's been able to be fully healthy. He's been battling it, trying to return, shake off that rust a little bit. If you lose a Vezina caliber goalie and you are getting a lesser version of them, totally defendable in that regard about maybe why things didn't work out as well. Even though Kevin Lankinen has been kind of a good stopgap, as I almost get stumbled there, did get stumbled, but we're going to keep going. A good stopgap in that regard. Maybe not to the level you need him to be a division contender, to be a Western Conference contender, and to be one of those NHL question marks about what could happen. But that's a big blow. Dakota Joshua was another example too. Guy that ended up, being diagnosed with testicular cancer. He had the mole, I believe, that he had to have removed. He did miss a part of the season, and his comeback has not been as productive as you're hoping. All things considered, again, you obviously have to look out for yourself in that way. But he had been a player that on the third line has been able to produce, maybe not so as much in this season. And then finally, going back to the Pettersson-Miller deal, it's really not Tocchet's job to be a babysitter. At the same time, people argue, you got to be able to command a locker room. But when you have grown men, grown adults that are getting paid millions of dollars to play a game, there shouldn't be something that happens where there is a massive rift. And this isn't just solely related to hockey. You will have things that go well beyond this. I think basketball's got a couple prime examples with the Spurs. But looking at that, again, it's not his job to say, how are you feeling today? Are you getting along with JT? Are you getting along with Elias? It's just ridiculous. At the end of the day, this is a job where they expect results, and he shouldn't have to be saying, can you guys even be in a room together for 10 minutes? Now that said, I think there are a lot of ways that this could play out for Rick, and I think that how this season finishes for him is going to decide his future. Maybe they miss the playoffs and he's sticking around. I don't know so much about that because, again, there's not been that long win streak where you can say, oh, well, we feel really hopeful for the future. It's been more of, well, things have really kind of fallen on the wayside, even though we'll kind of get it corrected, but not to the extent where we are getting ourselves safe into a playoff spot. I think that there is a possibility that if he makes the playoffs and then gets knocked out in the first round, they are still able to be safe, even if they have a bad performance. But ultimately for him, I think the best way to secure his job would be to make the playoffs, and even if they lose in the first round, which I think would be okay, even if that happens, they still have to be able to put up a massive fight and be able to push it to 6 or 7 games, and that's what I'm kind of hoping for in his regard. But at the same time, too, I'm not in love with the direction of this team. Again, they are not even a contender out west, and I don't really see them being a side that next year is going to be able to jump up in the standings and say, yeah, we're up there on par with teams like Dallas, with teams like Vegas, maybe with teams like Edmonton. But the good thing is for Rick, he only has to worry about the next 14 games to get them into the playoffs, and then, of course, however many games that they have in the postseason at that stage. And as a Vancouver fan, you better believe I'm paying attention to the standings. I'm trying to figure out how every team's schedule plays out in that regard. So for Rick and the boys, it's going to be a tall task to try to reclaim their status as a playoff side, playoff caliber team. And I don't exactly know how it's going to pan out. I would rather it be safe and secure, but I think for regular fans, you want to see St. Louis, you want to see Calgary, you want to see maybe even Utah get there in the mix and make things kind of crazy towards the end there. And I hope for everybody that works out in their favor, whether they just barely miss or we know again what works for everybody. But I want to occupy a playoff spot, even if we are knocked out in the first round, because at this stage it's like we're not going to be a bottom 4 team. So anyway, yeah, just kind of talking about that. I do apologize about not getting out a video yesterday. Got back from work, planned on doing it, but we had severe weather in our area. Had a tornado warning as well too. So I was like, had to get our stuff ready. If we were going to go down to the basement, get the dog ready and all that stuff. And the storm was just really loud. So I was like, do I want to record and have to worry about the audio quality? Not really. Do I want to have to stop in the middle of recording and then try to get everybody down just to not even get a video? Again, not really. But anyway, I'm rambling here. What are your thoughts on Rick Tocchet? Do you think that he will be back next season? What do you think he has to do to keep his job if you feel like he's kind of on the chopping block? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And Eagle of Hawk. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.